start by giving just, okay, it's being recorded now. I'm going to start by giving just a brief kind of description of what we're envisioning with tonight's event and our future events, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end here. We have 3 subsequent events planned. So our idea is to convene humanities experts, religious leaders, and community members to spark conversation about the history and potential of interfaith engagement to promote justice and peace in Milwaukee. The concept is inspired by the original Muslim-Christian dialogue group that first met in Milwaukee over 4 decades ago. By exploring lessons drawn from the group's historical role, our conversations will allow for reflection about new models of engagement between community and interfaith groups that pursue religious and social commitments during and in the aftermath of COVID-19. These talks consider how challenges to communities related to the pandemic have been addressed by interfaith partners and aims to deepen understanding about how communities can promote nonviolence, peacemaking, forgiveness, and justice. These conversations will provide a history of interfaith engagement and encourage new efforts to address challenges caused by the current pandemic and inform responses to future crises. These conversations will highlight the transformative teachings and practices within Islam and Christianity, while deepening the community's understanding of how to examine and use faith and knowledge to promote the common good. So before introducing our distinguished speakers here, who I'm very honored to share the stage with, just going to say a little bit about how our program is going to unfold over the next couple of hours, and how the Q&A will work. So after I'm done with these introductory remarks, we're going to hear from Dr. Irfan Omar and Caitlin Daly, whose book you saw on the cover of the advertisement, and they're going to speak a little bit about the context and how this grant came together. And then after that, Pardeep is going to give us an opportunity to reflect on the significance of this date, August 5th, for holding this event and talk about how that date has influenced his work. And after that, we'll jump into our panel discussion, and we'll have about half an hour or so for question and answers, both from those of you who are here in person, as well as those of you that are listening to us on the YouTube live stream. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box. And if you could please indicate in there if your question is for the entire panel or for a specific speaker, we'll have a chance to answer some of those at the end. And then we'll conclude with Rhonda Hill giving us a call to action and telling us what to go out in the community and do based on the ideas and thoughts and reflections that we share this evening. So with that said, it's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our panelists. First is Janan Najib, right here. And Ms. Najib is the founding member and current president of the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition. She's been a longtime spokesperson for Milwaukee's Muslim community and a leader in interfaith dialogue and understanding. Ms. Najib runs the Islamic Resource Center, a cultural center and Islamic lending library. She founded the Milwaukee Muslim Film Festival, publishes the Wisconsin Muslim Journal, and directs Our Peaceful Home, the first culturally specific Muslim family strengthening and domestic violence program in Wisconsin. She's also the founder of the Wisconsin Muslim Civic Alliance, which aims to promote civic involvement. In 2016, she became the first Muslim in Wisconsin to open the floor of the state legislature with a prayer. Ms. Najib sits on many community committees, commissions, and boards, including Wisconsin Public Radio, the Marcus Center for the Performing Arts, and the Wisconsin Historical Society. So Janan, welcome. Next is Caitlin Daly, who's joining us here on Zoom. Caitlin is a registered nurse and current PhD student at Duke University School of Nursing. Her research interests focus on the intersections of food, faith, and health. particularly exploring church-based health promotion interventions as an avenue to reduce diet-related racial health disparities. Caitlin continues to work with Dr. Irfan Omar to tell the story of interfaith efforts in Milwaukee. Caitlin received her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Marquette University in 2017 with double majors in nursing and theology and religion. So welcome, Caitlin. Okay, next is Pardeep Kalika. Pardeep is the Executive Director of Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, published author of The Gifts of Our Wounds, an intervention specialist who works with families and individuals involved in extremism. Pardeep is also a columnist with Milwaukee Independent and trauma clinician who works on community mental health concerns. Welcome, Pardeep. Next is Rhonda Hill. Rhonda has spent over a decade focusing on issues of racism and poverty. She has served as counselor, consultant, coach, and group facilitator. She is an analytical, creative systems thinker with compassion. Her commitment to raising awareness about racism is seen through her previous work with the Milwaukee Social Development Commission, the YWCA, the Greater Milwaukee Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, and as founder of Race and Faith. Rhonda founded Race and Faith in 2014 to deepen conversations on racism by making room for faith. Rhonda has master's degrees in marriage and family therapy and in theological studies. And finally, welcome Rhonda. Finally is Dr. Irfan Omar. Dr. Irfan received his doctorate in religious studies from Temple University in 2001. He is currently associate professor of theology at Marquette University, where he teaches courses in Islamic theology, peace studies, and interreligious dialogue. His research areas include Sufism and South Asian studies. He has also co-edited several volumes, including Interfaith Engagement in Milwaukee, A Brief History of Christian-Muslim Dialogue, which he co-edited with Caitlin, Peacemaking and the Challenge of Violence in World Religions, and the Judeo-Christian Islamic Heritage, Philosophical and Theological Perspectives. He currently serves on the editorial boards of the Journal of Ecumenical Studies and the Journal of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion. So welcome, Irfan, and thanks to all of our distinguished panel members for being here tonight. And with that, I'm going to hand it over now first to Caitlin, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the context of this grant coming together and the book. Caitlin.
Thank you, Drew. Welcome, everyone. So the book, I'm going to hold it up here because I have it by my side, entitled Interfaith Engagement in Milwaukee, A Brief History of Christian-Muslim Dialogue, has been authored by students, scholars, and community interfaith leaders. And the purpose of the book is to offer a collection of interfaith efforts and relationships that have occurred in Milwaukee, specifically shining a light on the power of mutual understanding and relationship building across faiths. The book began as an academic project, part of a graduate course on Christian-Muslim dialogue at Marquette University, taught by Irfan Omar, and it quickly evolved into what we realized was a much too important story to not document for more readers, particularly those wanting to learn more about interfaith dialogue and Milwaukee's rich history in such efforts. So the project provided an opportunity for me and a team of fellow students, graduate and undergraduate, to not only learn more about interfaith dialogue from an academic lens, but also from one of an experiential lens as well. We collected artifacts such as flyers, photos, and documents related to interfaith efforts across the city of Milwaukee, and conducted interview conversations with a plethora of people, community activists, scholars, religious leaders, and various university students that had been engaged in interfaith work. And so our project evolved over the course of the semester. And as it continued to evolve, we explored more texts on interfaith dialogue. We discussed, the things we were discovering in our research. And our classroom itself, the small group of students and Dr. Omar, as a group, I feel like we had around the table our own learning around interfaith and our own type of interfaith dialogue occurring, which was a really powerful experience to have. The book offers a glimpse at the nuances of interfaith dialogue as lived by dialogue partners themselves and as understood by scholars in the field. And importantly, the book is dedicated to all the people of dialogue everywhere, and especially to 3 original Milwaukee dialogue partners whose lives and legacies Dr. Omar will speak more about now.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Drew, for leading this effort, for introducing, for organizing. Thanks to Curto, thanks to Center for Peacemaking, thanks to Heather Hathaway and College of Arts and Sciences, especially the staff that has been working behind the scenes. I know you mentioned Patrick Connelly and Rob Smith. I like to mention Chris Chesky and Pariza Shirazi, without whom we would not be here talking. So thank you to all of you. And thanks to people who are present and people who are watching online. As Caitlin said, there's a rich history of Muslim-Christian dialogue, Muslim-Christian engagement in Milwaukee. In fact, interfaith engagement in Milwaukee. But the book that we co-edited, Caitlin and I, focused partly on Christian-Muslim effort because that story was just going into oblivion with Sister Jacine had turned 97 when we first met her. She was a Franciscan sister who basically opened the door for us, Caitlin, myself, and 3 other graduate students. So we wanted to at least start the story of interfaith engagement there. We also wanted to focus on Christian-Muslim part because there were several connections to the present, where we're living. And Janan Najib is one of that connections because she attended those original dialogues as a young woman, as a child of the 2 of the founders, co-founders of the Christian-Muslim dialogue in 1980. Speaking about interfaith connections, of course, the Christian-Muslim dialogue was a formal dialogue. It was approved by the Christian and Muslim leaders at the time. And it was also inspired partly by the Jewish-Catholic dialogue, which had begun 5 years earlier, 1975. So there's, nothing is new. There are all these connections that we found that are really important. The 3 dialogue partners that I think worth remembering for us, it's worth remembering them is Sister Jacine Reese, as I said, Sister Lucille Walsh, and Dr. Abbas Hamdani. And all 3 of them have passed on. And I often imagine them gathering wherever they are in their next abode, resuming the dialogue and sipping some heavenly tea. And perhaps Darjeeling tea. So the formal Christian-Muslim dialogue began in 1980, as you've learned, and soon the Vatican people heard about it. And as they learned more about this dialogue, they dubbed it as one of a kind. In other words, there was nothing like that in the world at that time. There was dialogue between scholars. There were dialogue between religious leaders, limited on a limited basis, but there was nothing like this that had been set up in Milwaukee, which was very structured and ran for over 12 years. And then the friendships lasted even longer, all the way up to today. They were concerned about questions of faith, but not just theological questions. They were interested in social issues. They were interested in justice. So one of the things they engaged themselves was to look at textbooks in public schools and see how the other religious other is portrayed, and how, Muslims are, talked about, or Jews, or they were specifically focused on Muslims and Arabs because that was a group's interest at the time. They also organized public events, much like this one, except that, in the audience at the time, there were 200, 300, and 400 people. And they brought in world-renowned scholars. And they, in a way, they put Milwaukee on the map, I think. So going back to the book that Caitlin and I did, and it was published in February 2020, it was designed to showcase the 40 years of interfaith activism in a summary fashion. It was a modest account of interfaith encounters and stories of outreach. But the book included, as I said, more than just the story of Christian-Muslim dialogues. Part 2 of the book covers a sampling of interfaith efforts across different religious communities, covering the last 2 decades. The book aimed to show how interfaith efforts of the last 40 years have helped build an infrastructure. Now think about that word for a bit. Infrastructure, not the physical roads, but the roads that lead from one community to another, where it facilitated relationships that had not been experienced prior to that. In other words, they could, pick up the phone and call each other. We're talking about religious leaders. We're talking about people who are high-level officials. We're talking about, and so, that's not a small feat. So that is what I call infrastructure of dialogue. It enabled, in fact, the most important thing here I want to say is that it enabled the communities, religious communities, but also the wider Milwaukee community to be able to withstand the crises. And as you all know, we have had many of these, including but not limited to 9/11, and also the horrific 2012 massacre at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek. And if you don't know what happened, all you have to do is go back and look at the press coverage of the time. The entire Milwaukee area, the entire Wisconsin and the country and the world came together, partly because the infrastructure that was built here by religious leaders across the Milwaukee, and they were able to communicate, they were able to unite, they were able to calm the fears, they were able to offer services, give hope, right? And even people who didn't believe in religion or didn't belong to any religious organization were able to come and participate in those kind of activities. So in short, I'm going to end this here. Milwaukee Interfaith Community has consistently acted and spoken out for the values enshrined in the written and unwritten manifesto of interfaith ethics. And that is a humanities issue. That is the human issue. Humanities is it concerns human condition. One of the crises that I just mentioned to you, the 2012 massacre, today happens to be the 9th anniversary of that tragic event. And as we gather here to celebrate our unity in the face of diversity, let us also remember. And I would invite Pradeep Kaleka to offer a reflection. As someone who was personally affected by it in more ways than one, he is, of course, the right person to do this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omar. Dr. Kim, thank you so much, Rhonda, Janan, Caitlin, everyone that's here tonight and listening online. There's so many people to thank. And I think that's what I think about when this day comes up on the calendar. I wished Janan a happy birthday. Her birthday was August 2nd, one day before mine. So we're both Leos. And then shortly after my birthday, I have to remember this. And I always struggle through this week in a way, but I'm always trying to be there for different people, communities, my family. And so we had somebody downstairs who just did a media thing right before this and asked, how do I spend my day? And I said, I wake up in the morning, I pray and I meditate and I give thanks. And I know that I'm going to be surrounded in love. And I know that because I fully feel that. And I don't just speak for myself, but as a community, we have fully felt that for 9 years. Rhonda asked me a question like how I'm doing. And I told her, I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to have a voice. So, I'm grateful to have the diverse faith communities that we do have, and really work towards a more loving, as you say, infrastructure of faith. And it's nothing short of, you see so many different things in life that can bring us down. And I think for the past year and a half, and it continues today, as we sort of thought that we were going to be in a place where we could all kind of gather and come together. We were very hopeful, only to understand that there's still very much a spiritual challenge as we go forward. And I would not want to fight this spiritual challenge with anyone outside of the people that are gathered with us today. And so I'm just really grateful. That day, 7 people lost their life. I want you to also remember that there was a person who actually did the shooting. He was an affiliated white supremacist, and we should also center him in our prayers as well. Not to condone or say, what he did was okay. But if we don't fundamentally understand that white supremacy is at the core and the foundation of this country, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. He was a product of this country. He was an ex-military vet. He became a white supremacist. At one point, he was just a young boy. And so today, the work that we do is to understand some of the infrastructure that exists in this country that has caused people to not fully live to what America's promise is. And I think today touched the chord with so many different people, because I think that there's a lot of people who were reminded that day, because 2012, let's face it, we had President Barack Obama, who was running for a re-election, and many people were calling this a post-racial society. I think nobody would be fooled by that now. And sometimes we need to see the deliberateness of this infrastructure and the ills of the system to actually do something about the system and policies that have caused people to not feel like they truly belong or truly are worth. So I'm grateful. Our community is grateful. I would ask people now to center their attention to other injustices that happen and that have happened, and let's really address them so that it's not just our community that is feeling that same love, but many communities that are feeling that same love. So I think thank you for being here today. Thank you for hosting this as we go forward and really have interfaith dialogues and have loving dialogues. Continue to do the work. Today is a somber remembrance of lives lost. One of those lives lost was my father's. 6 other people lost their lives. I fear that if we don't do the work now, that there's going to be other lives that are needlessly lost as we go forward, and then that systems, policies, infrastructures, all of these things need courage, and we need to change them so that those lives lost are not done so in vain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Pardeep and Irfan and Caitlin, for those remarks. So I have a few questions here for our for our panelists, and we're hoping to just make this conversational and kind of in that spirit of loving dialogue that Pardeep was talking about. All right, so my first question for everyone here to get us started, could you each speak about some of the transformative teachings and practices in your tradition that compels a believer or practitioner to use faith and knowledge to promote the common good? Building on that, how do you see the role of interfaith in helping that effort?
Well, maybe I'll get started, and we can kind of go back and forth as our thoughts sort of coalesce. First of all, I also would like to thank Marquette and thank everyone here, and thank the panel, and thank everyone that did show up, and those that are watching virtually as well. This is an important I think discussion, and it does remind me of the years and decades of interfaith discussions, Muslim Christian dialogues that took place from when I was still a student in school and would hang out with my parents, and then again, much later as these continued, and then also in my life when I became involved with the Muslim, when we recreated sort of a Muslim Catholic women's dialogue, but that's another conversation. Going back to your question, as far as what within our faith really helps us to promote working for the common good, I think that I would have to, that's kind of a multi-layered question, and I think that I would probably have to start with the concept of taqwa. Taqwa in Islam is God consciousness. It's the idea that every human being is born with this idea of knowing God, and you nurture that. And that concept of God consciousness, we start with all of the rituals that you go through are really just a way of helping you to nurture and develop that sense of God consciousness, because at the end of the day, that's really what matters. And that's what needs to guide the work that you do for the common good and the work that you do in society. Because within Islam, it's interesting. If you look at the scripture and you look at many of the verses, even within the Quran, you find that if you commit sins that are seen to be against God, if you repent sincerely, God forgives you, and end of story. But if you commit an act of injustice or oppression against a fellow human being, you are not forgiven until you make that right. That means you have to make it right with that person. You have to seek their forgiveness. You have to make them whole. And so the lesson behind that is that our real job is to know God, but God is not really in need of our prayers and our fasting and our charity and all of these things. These are all to really help build us and make us into the kind of human beings that we need to be in order to work for the common good, in order to work for bettering humanity, for bettering society. And when we talk about taqwa, we talk about God consciousness. This is not just for human beings. That means that every step you take is conscious. That's why within Islam, for example, alcohol is prohibited. People say, why is alcohol prohibited? Because the idea is that every step, every breathing moment should be conscious. We should be a conscious effort to keep that consciousness of God and to do what is right. And so that means taking care of the environment, conserving natural resources, being kind to animals, thinking about others when we eat, whatever it is that we do. So that's all part of the common good. Another layer to this is that within Islam, we are taught that there's a tradition of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says that if you see something wrong, if you see an injustice, change it with your hands. That means stop it. You see someone being beat, you see something happening, stop it with your hands. If for whatever reason you're unable to do that, then use your voice. That means continue to campaign against it, to talk about it, to protest. And for whatever reason, you don't even have that as an option, then you continuously hate it within your heart. That means you're never okay with that injustice. And so by building that, that develops that concept of common good, that concept of what I can do to make humanity better, to stop injustice, to stop oppression, because that's really what, at the end of the day, our job really is. And by serving humanity, we are in turn serving God.
Thank you. I want to say ditto, but that's probably not enough. Happy birthday to both of you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love
Our
birthdays.
26th birthday.
Right, exactly. Forever young. With a whole bunch of wisdom though. Yeah, I really appreciate you speaking about the God consciousness, and I've heard Pardeep talk a lot about God consciousness as well. And for me, with that question about our traditions, first thing that came to my mind was a quote from James Cone, which is he's a theologian. He's passed on now. He's known most for Black liberation theology, but one of his quotes that I love to use that I think speaks to my tradition, especially coming from the Black church tradition, is the quote is, "Church is the place that confirms your somebodyness." Church is the place that confirms your somebodyness. And I think you can translate that to various houses of worship, whether it's the temple, whether it is wherever you align yourself and gather to meet with other people. It is in that gathered place with other people who are aligned with your ways of worship and doing things that confirms that you have a place in the world. And why that was so important for us as Black Americans, and why when I first heard that quote, it made so much sense to me, is to make me think about my grandmother, who's 80 years old. Last week, we just celebrated her birthday over the weekend, but my grandma, I will tell you in a minute that God taught her how to read. She had to drop out of school in the 6th grade so that they could work in the cotton fields. So she didn't have opportunity really to gain education. And so the place that elevated her sense of self and worth was church. That was the only place that she could go to that people would listen to someone who outside of that space, people wouldn't say was qualified to lead or do anything because she only had a 6th grade education. But in church, she was highly revered and had a place and had a position and a voice. And even now to this day, my grandmother leads and is a pastor of her own congregation at 80 years old, because church is the place that confirms your somebodyness. And so for me and my tradition, and coming from the long history of the Black church tradition, and if you haven't had the chance, please do watch the Henry Louis Gates documentary on the Black church, which I just thought was so profound. But it is that heritage coming from a space of being enslaved and wanting to be in a place of worship, but being told you can't worship in a space with all white people, or you have to sit in a certain space just because you're Black. That made a lot of Black people understand it was something deeper, more, that being a part of a religious community was not about excluding, but affirming and saying you belong. And so for me, and out of my tradition, it is saying, thinking about a lot of spirituals, but one would say, you may be able to kill my body, but you can't kill my soul. It is this thing that I still exist, that I'm somebody. And so I think we take that out into the world that says we're going to create space, we're going to craft and hone in on how to help you become the best somebody you can be, how to help you better live into that God consciousness that you spoke of. And we do that not alone, but in community. So I love the whole infrastructure. You just had me buzzing. I'm writing out all on my paper, but I think that's so true. And that's what we do within our religious communities, is that we do create an infrastructure where all of our somebodyness can come to life. And so, yeah, I'll just leave it at that because I can keep going on and on, but thank you.
I think as far as just building off of Ron, yeah, somebodyness, our personhood, our God consciousness, our sacredness, within and maybe, originally when you asked that question, I was thinking about a passage, but then as Janan and Rhonda gave their explanation, I thought about an experience, and I thought about the experience that even, as we have been praying virtually, or now we're kind of going back to our places of worship or sanctuary, our masjid, synagogue, mandars, churches. As we go back, we're attempting to kind of go back to an experience. And that experience, when we gather together and we discover truths together, it's one of the places that are left within the world that where we should actively challenge our truth. And because it's challenged in such a loving way that within Sikhi, you can come to your own opinion, but it's considered your own personal truth. It's considered your own personal opinion. When you pit that against other people's opinions and truths, you start to discover what truth really is, because it's more of a communal truth. So it's discovered within a sangat, right? And that's why you do pray together. That's why you do gather together. A gurdwara is basically just short name. Dwara means door. Guru means teacher. Sikh means learner, right? So you have a religion that's kind of based on learning and teaching, and going to a gurdwara, sacred place, learning from the teacher. Now the most sacred teacher is considered the Guru Granth, which is the book, which is the scripture. That happened as the final living guru was before he was killed and his sons were killed. He said that you can kill a human being, a person, but you will never kill the truth. You will never kill a communal truth. And the communal truths that if we are actively willing to challenge our own personal truths, go back to why compassion is so important, why love is so important, right? Why community is so important. It's because those are the truths that show up within diverse faith communities. And I think that as we speak about the work that we do within different faith communities, and building off of those universal truths, because oftentimes we can get into a place where differences are centered and the differences are focused on. And we start discussions from why I disagree with you. That has not traditionally been our approach. Our approach is to build a foundation, and yes, we do have wonderful, unique differences. But that oftentimes we want to make sure that we're centering what our faiths do stand for, rather than how we're different. So I think speaking from as far as Sikhi, that experience of just building on both personhood and sacred consciousness, and then the experience of gathering together.
Great. And then, so I guess the follow-up then would be, in terms of these transformative practices and God consciousness and community and being somebody, how do you see the role of interfaith in helping that effort? Why is interfaith an important practice to catalyze what's in one's tradition, bring him into conversation? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Caitlin.
No, that's okay. I could have looped into that one. So no worries. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So my experience comes from the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. That's the tradition that I identify most closely with at this time. It was the religion I grew up in and am continuing to learn about. So I'll be speaking from my perspective from that identity today. You might also hear some influences of Ignatian spirituality from the Jesuits, a religious community called the Society of Jesus, a religious order of the Roman Catholic Church, who established Marquette in 1881. So Ignatian spirituality was influential to me as a student during my time at Marquette. But to speak with the lens of the Lutheran Church, so the ELCA Lutheran Church released a policy statement entitled A Declaration of Interreligious Commitment in August of 2019, and that was to fulfill a request for a statement that clearly outlined the responsibility of the church to engage and understand people of other faiths better. So much of the language I'll use in my response is lifted from that document. I'll try to indicate where, but it amazes me always, just the synergy I think that I'm hearing in a lot of our responses right now. Something that struck me in this document that I'll speak to in my response is this idea of agency and what that looks like and what we're called to do. And so just a brief outline on the Declaration of Interreligious Commitment. It asserts that working towards the common good is a part of God's vision, which is described as life abundant for all in the document. And the document defines the common good as working towards justice and peace for all people in creation. And so the church, the document emphasizes, quote, religious diversity when accompanied by mutual understanding and cooperation enriches the whole, end quote. And the document continues to also say that dialogue enhances the self-understanding of each participant involved. And so they recognize that the engagement of similarities and differences and the appreciation of those among different religions and worldviews facilitates this interfaith work. And so the theological underpinning, I'd say, to my interfaith engagement is my call as a Lutheran to love my neighbor, serve alongside my neighbor, and live in solidarity with my neighbor. And this document speaks of doing those three things. And they also mention that neighbor is a term that does not exclude anyone, and even those that do not hold a religion, or for people that hold religions different than our own. And so the church emphasizes reaching out across boundaries of, quote, religion, race, ethnicity, gender, and class, and then doing so to understand the needs of all in a community, as well as working together in response to meet those needs. So what I find really compelling within this document and in relation to the social justice issues of our time is what the statement says about cultivating agency in order to live in solidarity with our neighbors. So I'm going to read a little bit of a longer quote from the document, which says, standing up for those who are being targeted or excluded takes courage. We are called to exhibit this courage and take this risk. In the face of social pressures that make us feel paralyzed, our calling includes developing a sense of agency. That is a sense that each of us can make a difference. Our attention needs to be focused on our God-given gifts and responsibilities, rather on the many impediments to acting on behalf of those who are maligned, harassed, or harmed, recognizing that some of our neighbors are experiencing multiple forms of oppression at once. For all of this, a support community of fellow believers and interreligious partners can make an empowering difference. So I hear that call from the Lutheran Church, as well as through scripture in the Bible. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, it speaks about spiritual gifts that are given uniquely to each individual from the Spirit of God, gifts of wisdom, knowledge, healing, and others. And verse 7 states, to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. And the chapter continues on in verse 12 to talk about different parts of the body working all together within their own function, but designed as so to work as one. And verse 21 reads, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need for you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need for you. And further along, verses 25 to 26, acknowledge that God designed the body so that, quote, there may be no division in the body, but that members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one is honored, all rejoice together. And so the chapter goes on to speak about how this relates to the body of Christ. And for me, this chapter resonates as an interfaith leader. And to me, I hear this as God's call to recognize the difference that I am able to make within my own tradition and reaching across other traditions as well, to build my agency, my sense of being able to make a difference, to promote the common good with my God-given gifts that I've been gifted with, and to do so in partnership with my neighbors, because we all matter. So I'll pause here, and with the next panel question, I'll emphasize on the role of interfaith in helping to ignite this sense of agency.
Yeah, thanks for that, Caitlin. I think that's actually the perfect transition to that question. So yeah, what is the role of interfaith in furthering that agency? And yeah.
Well, the way I can only, speak for myself, what kind of motivates me to get involved in interfaith. For me personally, I see interfaith not really as a choice, but almost as an injunction within the faith. There's a verse within the Quran that says, "O humanity, we have created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and we have made you into nations and tribes so that you may come to know and cherish one another, not to despise each other. And truly the best of you is he who is most conscious of God." And so the idea that God has purposely created us into nations and tribes. And there's other verses that talk about, the variety of your languages and colors is really a reflection of, for those that have knowledge, this is a reflection of the magnificence of God. And so from a Muslim perspective, this idea of challenging us to be more conscious of God, which also means working more for the common good, is a healthy competition. Not to say that God loves you best or loves me best, or you're going to hell or you're going to heaven, because God did not, kind of put us in charge of that. That's not our role. What God did tell us to do is to compete in a healthy way and to work together for the common good. And so interfaith is just really a reflection of what we must do as human beings to come together to achieve the common good. You find that it's impossible for one particular group of people to accomplish what many together can do. And imagine when everybody comes with their diversity of ideas, their diversities of viewpoints, their diversity of how to do things, and they bring all of these wonderful gifts together, what they can then accomplish, and do together. Within the Quran too, there's another verse that says basically where we're being asked, it says that, come, calling about people that believe in God, come to a common word between us and you. And what is that common word? It's that belief in God, that commitment to God, that commitment to goodness, to compassion, to justice. And so I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but I think a couple of decades ago, Muslim leaders around the world, actually, when there was a lot of trials and tribulations in the world, they actually put out a document calling upon religious leaders, and it was called a Common Word document, and it said, come together. So that means we come together in interfaith and solidarity to see how we can better this world together. So again, for me, it's not just a matter of, it's a nice thing to do, or it's something that has enriched me, etc., which all of this is true, but I also see it as a religious obligation.
Yeah, like a mandate, like we would say, it's my calling to do so. I was gonna say, Miss Janelle, we need another one of those gatherings from those leaders because we in trouble out here. For me, I will say, I have to say, interfaith for me has been a selfish thing. I'm like yours. I think it's become a part of my calling, but first in this space of selfishness, because I've been so personally enhanced by it. By being able to be in relationship with those who were not raised to believe and think and see the world or see God the way I have been raised to do so, has only helped me to grow personally. It's enlarged my worldview. And I think that that is what interfaith really can do for those who allow themselves to become part of such a network. Even if you're a person who would say, I may be agnostic or atheist, because I've met a lot of people in interfaith who would fall into those categories, but have also helped me learn and grow more. And for me, from my perspective, in the Christian tradition, as we talk about being made in the image of God, or we talk about the Imago Dei, right? Just being made in the image of God. And what that means for me is that all of us are made in the image of God. So that tells me that whenever I'm looking at you, Irfan, or you out there in the audience, or you, Janan, you're showing me a piece of God. I know God better because I'm connected to you. That means that not one person holds all of that, but us collectively together reveal a little bit more about the nature of God. And for me, that's exciting. For me, it helps me again to see my place in the world, that I'm not the beginning and the end. I'm not the first and the last, that every piece of knowledge about what is to be known isn't all found in the little Pentecostal church that I was raised in. But it is to be found when we all gather and come together, that you hold a piece of the majesty of God and you hold a piece of it. Now, what are we going to do with that? And I think that that's the point, that infrastructure that you mentioned, that interfaith creates for us, those who qualify and call ourselves as seekers and that are willing to be open and to see more than we thought we could see alone. That when we gather together with other people who want to be open and explore, or have such a call or a mandate as you do, we begin to use that to take on the larger issues. It empowers us to say, hey, I'm not here by myself. I don't know everything. I don't have to know everything. And I know, matter of fact, I'm with some people who disagree with me, but that's okay, because now we're able to demonstrate that even though we don't all believe the same thing, or we don't all see God the same way, or heck, some of us might not even believe in a God, but we believe that the world can do better and should be better. And so we're gonna all come together for that purpose. And I think that's what for me, interfaith does. That's the agency that it can give you, to say, you don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to be right on every issue. And no matter what you're bringing to the table, we've created a space for you. And I think that emboldens people to take on the challenges. Thank
you. The first day that, this is kind of a closed door meeting, so I don't even know if I could reveal this, but I can reveal it, it's okay. It's been 2 years since, well, Interfaith can't fire me now, but, and this is a good thing. This is a good, oh yeah, it's live stream, oh man. So, first day that was hired on as director of the Interfaith Conference, and we've been in existence for now 52 years, and came on as the first non-Christian executive director in our long and storied history. 20 judicatories, right? The sat there with representatives and leaders and talked about the oneness of God. Every different faith. And I think that, you know, when Janan and Rhonda talk about it, it is our mission, it is our commitment, it is our foundation, it is at the heart of all of our faiths. Like interfaith within Sikhi, we have passages that literally talk and say koi bole ram ram, koi kudaya, koi sevikusaya, koi alai. And at that time, then they said it in a way that was old Gurmukhi, right? But if they would have known Christ, they would have said koi bole Christ, koi bole Buddha, koi bole. They would have said that. Then what they were basically saying is that we know this faith. Some people say this name. Some people pray this way. But through the way that we pray, we get to know you. We get to understand you. We get to feel you. We get to experience you. And I don't know, and I don't mean to belittle those that aren't into interfaith stuff, because a lot of times I think there's also I mean, this kind of goes into the challenges of interfaith, but sometimes people understand interfaith to be some sort of one world religion where you just have to dilute yourself. And it's not that. It is something where you can bring your whole heart. And when we're talking about our whole heart, we're talking about the foundation of being a Muslim, being Jewish, being Christian, being Buddhist, being all of these things, but genuinely being that. I say, bring all of you. Because through that, I'm going to give you the spiritual challenge here on earth. And you're going to go there. And you're going to learn in a mandir, in a church, and in a masjid, in a gurdwara. You're going to learn there, and you're going to get your foundation. And then after you get your foundation, you're going to go out into the world. And you're going to see many people who don't believe like you, look like you, walk like you, dress like you. You're going to see many people of different races, don't have the same skin complexion of you. They don't have the same worth as far as like what is worth on this earthly earth, right? What we dictate as far as like how much money you have or how much money you don't have. And my spiritual challenge to you is, did you learn enough in your foundational stone to be able to see God in them? And part of it, we have to understand that maybe what we're going through right now is because we failed. Some of us have failed. And there's too much of that failure to see God in everything that we need to recalibrate. And so the misery and the suffering that we're going through does have a purpose. It is making us sit still long enough to understand what kind of earth is going to be ushered in for generations going forward. But too many people are not understanding this as a spiritual calling. They're understanding this as a temporary inconvenience. And so when we think about why people are getting away from faith, maybe the messengers of faith have failed them. And we have to be honest with that. Maybe we haven't taught them in an interfaith way. Right? So they don't understand and see the humanity in the next person. And so I think that within all of us and not everyone here and listening, hopefully we're speaking to the choir, right? But I think that it will take a lot of work because there's a lot of people who don't believe. I've had lots of conversations. I was telling Dr. Kim, I've had lots of conversations. Pardeep, I'd like you. But this interfaith thing, it's kind of strange to us. Yeah. It's foundational to us. It's in our passages. It's in the first couple words of our scripture, which is the Mool Mantra, which says Ekunkar. Right? And it basically means we are one. And you can't read the rest of the scripture without understanding that. It's almost like don't read the rest of the scripture without understanding this preface. And so I think for Sikhs and I think for all of our faiths, I'm not allowed to speak for every faith, but I can tell you that every faith, like most faiths, our denominational faiths were represented that day and spoke about the same universal truth.
Pradeep, I appreciate you saying a lot of what you just said, and everyone too who spoke before. I think one thing that sticks with me about what you said too is that we don't have to dilute ourselves when we come into these interfaith spaces. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize, because I think that is often a fear that, coming to that space, you'll either, yourself be diluted, or, you're just bringing your whole self is just so important to emphasize, because I think we can shy away from, the questions that we're having, the uncertainties that we're having, but bringing that all to the table in conjunction with other people, I just think is a powerful way to process how interfaith can be a tool. And I think just some general tools that interfaith does offer, I think we've spoken to this a bit here, but you can educate yourself on common issues when you're together with others. It helps develop critical thinking to increase self-understanding of one's own faith. Again, any questions or uncertainties that are there, you can kind of wrestle with in community, listening and understanding to others in light of their religious teachings and their own expressions of those teachings. And I think interfaith also helps discern true beliefs from misinformation. And again, thinking about bringing our whole selves to interfaith, I do want to shift this question a little bit, or answer a related question, thinking about how does one see their role in interfaith engagement for the common good? I think it's been made very clear how important interfaith can be for a lot of issues that we are facing. But I wanted to take an opportunity as well to talk about how we can see our role in that, because that might not always be clear. And again, there could be barriers to engaging in these interfaith spaces. So again, going back to this idea of agency, of bringing our whole self, having that, God consciousness, that somebodyness, all that's been mentioned. I think a really, easy and appropriate entryway into developing a sense of agency around interfaith endeavors related to social justice is a word I want to offer here, and a practice of integration. And so as a student, as a community member, an employee, a family member, you can integrate interfaith into the places and people with whom you learn, live, play, work, live and worship with, and at. And I think it's about connecting those gifts that have manifested in different ways in your career, your vocation, your hobbies and interests, with opportunities to promote social justice from an interfaith approach, which, as Pradeep said, might not be a familiar lens to take, that, and one maybe not people haven't grown up with or are resistant to, but opportunities, in kind of tapping into people's interests within social justice concerns, whether that be related to health, the environment, education, race, sexuality, other topics, and other experiences. Those social justice concerns can be approached with an interfaith lens. And so I just want to offer a couple examples, as a student, there's a breadth of courses and student groups available, both on and off campus. And so finding topics, again, that you as an individual are passionate about, and maybe you with a group of friends or a community are passionate about, finding those topics, exploring them and looking at them through an interfaith lens can be done in a classroom, connecting with groups in the Milwaukee community as well, to bring, or wherever the city you are currently in, surrounding yourself, expanding yourself beyond campus, and bringing bringing the community, onto campus. So for example, if you're a student, say, interested in environmental justice, you could seek out theology courses related to the environment or take environmental classes, and bring your interfaith interest into those discussions, or your interfaith questions into those discussions. And then thinking about Milwaukee, you can engage, with Interfaith Earth Network, so a program through the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, just as an example for a student. But even for community members, engaging with your surroundings by searching for online interfaith groups in the community, at your place of worship, or even your place of work. Recently, I came to learn about interfaith corporate outreach happening in the workplace through different, what can be called employee resource or interest groups. So I'll use, again, another Milwaukee example. Rockwell Automation has a faith-friendly Family and Allies Employee Resource Group that's collaborated in the past with the Interfaith Conference and the Milwaukee Muslims Coalition, Women's Coalition, to bring interfaith dialogue and educational programming to the workplace. So I'm sure Janan or Pardeep could probably speak more on those specifics of that program, but I mention it to highlight the integration of what interfaith can look like in the workplace to promote the common good. Other companies as well, such as Facebook, Google, Salesforce, and others have also had similar groups, again, as a way to promote religious diversity and inclusion and understanding in the workplace, and also to empower employees to, again, be their whole self and bring, be comfortable and bringing that to the workplace. And so, again, just to offer a couple, all to say that, these couple examples are opportunities I see to integrate interfaith with existing passions that people might have and interests that can work to promote that common good. And there's various entryways into that interfaith engagement.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. I think that actually might be a good place to build onto a next question to give to the rest of the panelists, which are what are effective strategies for promoting interfaith dialogue, for trying to expand the conversation? Rhonda, you were mentioning, like, well, what about people who don't have a faith, or agnostic or atheist? And Pardeep, you're mentioning people who are just kind of, what is this? Why would you do that? So like, what do you do about that? What are strategies to try to expand the reach of interfaith dialogue?
I could say something. First, let me just go back to what Janan was saying. It's really interesting because Janan, when you mentioned that Quranic verse about compete in good works, I just realized I read an article a while back which was about that verse, and he titled the article as Olympics of Good Works. I thought I should mention it since we are in the season of Olympics. I'm gonna talk about that important question that Drew just mentioned, that what about people who see themselves outside of faith? But listening to all of you here, one word that kept coming up for me was humility. And humility is the heart of faith, practice of faith. So even if you don't have faith, you could still practice humility as a human condition, as a basic thing. Now, I was reading this neuroscientist, David Eagleman, and he talks a lot about empathy. And he's done a lot of experiments. And I know that people who are in my class probably know I really love David Eagleman. I like to talk about him everywhere. But he's not coming from a religious perspective. Although he has a Jewish background, but he's a neuroscientist, and he's done a lot of studies and put people under the scanner. And so he talked about empathy as something that we all are born with. And he's done experiments on toddlers, newborns, and to sort of validate. And then I realized my study of world religions talks about this idea that every person is born good, right? Every person is born good. So what does that really mean? So then I began thinking about empathy as the currency of faith. And that's, vast majority of people of faith, and even people who don't have faith, use that all the time, that currency, right? I mean, that Pardeep was talking about love. But what has happened, I think, what Pardeep was saying is about the failure, is that we have taken faith and put it in this ideological frame from where we get this idea of who we are allowed to spend this empathy on and who we are just supposed to ignore. And that's not really empathy, because empathy is, as I said, the neuroscientist experiments, the religious traditions teachings speak about it as something that is given. And you naturally gravitate towards what is right. Naturally gravitate towards. But when you weaponize faith into an ideology, then you're able to say, because of certain features of this person, she deserves my empathy, which is not empathy, it's just a made up sort of favor. And because of certain features of that person, she does not deserve my, those same experiments. So I would say that people who are outside of faith parameters, they might think about what is it that interfaith accomplishes? And maybe they could find another channel to do those things. And they are, and then there are many who are doing that too. Thanks.
I think that's a really good question. I think we have to create and try to create the entry points into interfaith. As I think Caitlin mentioned, some companies are creating spaces through employee resource groups and things like that to try to make faith more open for everybody to engage it at the level of which they feel comfortable. I think when I worked for Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, we had the Amazing Faith Dinner Dialogue program, which I felt was a program that created space for people to show up no matter where you are in your knowledge base of your own religious teachings, or just maybe perhaps interest and wanderings, or just wanting to get to know other people. That was just a safe space, I think, for people to explore and share and answer questions from either their own religious teachings or just life, how they see it. And so I think the more that we create those kinds of spaces and opportunities where people have permission to just gather and come and wrestle together in a way that you create a safety. And I think you can only do that first through celebration, right? So even if you're doing, Caitlin mentioned Rockwell, I mean, they had speakers come and they had food, and they do every once a year, they have a fair where they explore a topic. One year they did weddings. So people from all different traditions share how they celebrate weddings. So you have this element of celebration to it, and these things that people do that's just common, and you share, well, what does that look like for you from your either faith tradition or ritual experience, how you want to express how we should gather and love and create whatever we're trying to create. So I think it is figuring how we create opportunities to celebrate each other, create opportunities for sharing, create this feeling of safety that then allows you to begin to ask questions that allow people to ponder and share what they really think or what they really believe. But I think it is part of that has to be an open invitation, especially for those who would be non-theistic or more agnostic or atheist, to create and say, well, you have a system of belief. You're thinking something, you believe something. It might not be what I believe, but it's valid. And so we want to hear from your perspective. But I think we just have to do more work on laying out that, saying that we give you permission to be celebrated and to speak and feel comfortable with wrestling with us. That's just kind of what I'm thinking about right now. Might have a different opinion tomorrow. That's what I'm thinking right now.
I want to take this back a little bit. First of all, I wanted this concept of people, without faith. That's also a faith, because you have to purposely decide not to worship, God, or not to believe in a certain thing. And that in itself is a kind of faith. So I still consider them under the umbrella of interfaith. It reminds me of a story from Islamic history, where one of the four caliphs after the death of Prophet Muhammad, the last caliph, Ali, who was also the son-in-law and the cousin of Prophet Muhammad, had sent a delegation at the time to Egypt to kind of forge relations in Egypt. So he sent a delegation. He got word back from this delegation that said, well, you know, in Mecca and the areas we have been, we know of Christians, we know of Jews, we even know of like the pagans at the time. But here in Egypt, we see people, we're seeing, you know, religions and groups that we've never encountered before, and we don't really know how to deal with them. We have people that worship fire and people that are, you know, this and that. And so a message came back from Ali that said, if they are not your brothers in faith, then regard them as your brothers in humanity. So you have to deal with them that way, regardless of what it is that they believe. But, you know, I have been involved in just enormous types of programs and things related to interfaith. But if I was going to say what is the most effective way of doing interfaith, is for each person to really look at their sphere of influence. Every single person has members within their family, their extended family, that have every opinion in the book about certain groups of people. So rather than go and start an interfaith with people on the outside, start educating the people that you really have influence on. So let's start looking at our sphere of influence. I think that when I've gone out to speak, and I've done tons of speaking over these past number of decades, one of the most common things that I hear is that, well, my aunt so-and-so says that Muslims believe this, or my uncle Bob, whatever, you know, or, you know, my mom or so you hear this all the time. And it's always been in the back of my head that if those people that really are open to different viewpoints, and, you know, when we talk about even interfaith, I think that this is such a beautiful thing from God, because can you imagine how boring if we all were part of groupthink and group dress and group everything? You know, how boring that would be. You're not challenged. Interfaith challenges you even within your own faith to really understand things. I'll never forget one year when I had given a talk about fasting Ramadan. And it was really interesting because it was, you know, Ramadan took place before Lent. During Lent, I probably was speaking at 40 churches about the fast of Ramadan, because it's you know, it's a fast, but heck, it's very different than the fasting of Lent. And so it was almost like a way of challenging my Catholic brothers and sisters, my Christian brothers and sisters, of, you know, how can we really focus on our fast to achieve what it is that we want to do? And I've learned so much from many different people within the faith community. I mean, you grow by learning, you grow. And those people that honestly are fearful, it's one of two things, because they don't understand and they think that it is going to be a one faith diluted, or they're fearful and they're very shaky in their own faith and they're worried about being affected. But you know what? You don't learn anything, and you won't be challenged to improve your understanding of your own faith until someone asks you a question and you can't answer that question. It forces you to go back and to understand. But really, if I was going to say that, you know, all of the different events and programs, and also, you know, everything that has been mentioned are all phenomenal. But if we want to kind of take it to the first 101 level, let's start with our families and our spheres of influence.
So faith is one of the most prevalent things within this changing demographic. It's one of the most prevalent things that's part of somebody's life, but it's one of the least understood in the United States. People the way that people are, they grow up in childhood, the way that they pray, the way they get married, the way that death, food, culture, all of these things. But it's one of the least understood, like, parts of a person's personhood. And I think that as we go forward, really, yeah, again, like, affecting our spheres of influence, making sure that ERGs and we're having conversations around this. For a very long time, we didn't want to have conversations around faith. We thought that there was that sort of should be left out of conversations about, we can talk about race, we can talk about other parts of a person's life, but faith, if you go to faith or religion, that's going to be something that's just, it's going to shake. It's going to shake the relationship so much so that you won't have a relationship anymore. So I think a lot of people now are having the courage to talk about faith diversity. Again, I think it's one of the least understood parts. And again, because it is like Janan said, it's so nuanced, even just within a faith, right? You can talk about a Christian who is from the south side of Milwaukee to the north side of Milwaukee to the west to Waukesha. They're going to have different political beliefs. Now let's talk about a Sikh that lives from, in India or the UK or in Africa or in the Americas. There's going to be so many different differences from a Muslim that lives in the Middle East to a Muslim that lives in America to a Muslim that maybe lives in parts of India. There's so many different nuances. So there's so much to learn. It's because sometimes it can be overwhelming. But we have to start somewhere. We have to kind of, again, coming back to Dr. Omar's point, we have to be humble. We have to practice cultural humility. None of us knows everything. Part of the day-to-day struggle of interfaith is I'll never know enough. I'll never be an expert on any of this stuff. And it's so daunting. Before I got the position in interfaith, I was up studying all kinds of things. I was like, I'm never gonna know enough. This is so daunting. But when you get to that point where it's okay. It's not about the destination. It's really we're all on this journey. One of the sadder points of just like faith, and I think the faith conversation was as a, within the mental health world, I think all of us are doing work within the mental health world and to make faith something that is understood or making it a part of even that process. Oftentimes I saw somebody and, as a therapist, as a counselor, you would see people. And I would ask them, do they go to church? Do they go to the mosque? Do they go? No, I don't go in there. Why? Why don't you go in there? Because I feel damaged. I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like I'm not worth going in there. I was abused. I was sexually abused. I can't go in there. I can't show my face in there. I've done something wrong. And I felt a deep sadness around that. The person that should be going into the church is the one not feeling worthy to go into the church. The person that should be the person who's sitting at the front row. That should be the example in life. They're probably in a place where they're genuinely healing. So I think, thinking about as faith communities, we have to, and we've done a good job of this over the past year and a half of saying, okay, maybe a faith place isn't just, 4 walls, a roof, and that. Maybe a faith place is all over. Maybe we as faith leaders need to expand the definition of who we call people of faith. Maybe it's just not people of theology. Maybe it's the person who's growing up on 24th and Center and right now doesn't know what's happening with mom and dad. It's kind of like, man, I don't know what's going on. I'm struggling through all of this. Maybe it's the person that's on South Side who doesn't have any concept of God, but has genuine faith. That if they go to school, if they learn, if they graduate, that somehow, some way, this country will reward them. And they'll live a life that was better than the life that they would have done if they wouldn't have done that. So how do we define faith? I think the challenge is expanding that definition to make sure that we're building bigger tables and a bigger umbrella of faith.
And I'll add there too that something I was going to mention as you all were talking was in the book in Sundu's chapter, in the prologue, she talks about interfaith dialogue is like air. We cannot always see it, but it is always around us and is necessary for building peace and harmony. And I just really love that depiction of it, of interfaith and faith itself as this air around us, because I think it allows us to see, and again, another entry point into seeing how faith can inform the common good and help us find those solutions. I think when we see it and recognize that it is a living, breathing entity and feeling and conversation with another person, I think it opens up, it kind of like decenters, or it kind of deconstructs it to something that I think is more tangible and perhaps to some people and more accessible. And I really liked the way that this conversation is going in terms of, we can start with our sphere of influence. I think that's so important to see that, we have different microcosms of society in many areas of our life. Again, work and our workplace, our places of worship, our homes. And so starting there, I think is crucial and a great first step. I like how you said that, Janan, the 101, bringing it back to the 101. And then also just seeing how, again, as Rhonda had said, we can continue to create these spaces and different entry points in different areas. I think one thing I do want to add as well, and it goes to the point that you were making, Rhonda, of validation, understanding that everyone is invited to this space, I think, and talking about the courage, as Pardeep said, it takes to enter into these spaces. I think that's something that we can't overlook. I think there is a lot of fear and uncertainty and resistance around faith, and for many, again, all valid reasons. But I think part of, in addition to what's been said, I think an additional part is giving yourself permission to accept that invitation to be at that table. And I will very honestly say, I think when I was invited to be a part of this panel, I wholeheartedly was like, who am I to be here on this, on this panel? Like, what do I have to offer? What perspective am I bringing? And all of those, I think, worries and thoughts that can build up fear and keep me away from these spaces are the exact things that we need to dig deep into our faith, into our humility, to challenge those and to show up to those spaces, which again, I get is not always easy. And, people are coming from all different perspectives, but I think cultivating that, just giving yourself permission as a human being to show up with all of those concerns, with all of your excitements to these spaces of interfaith dialogue is encouraged, it's welcomed, and it takes courage to do so, and we can dig into our faith and into our humility to find that courage. So just wanted to offer that additional piece as well.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. So I think we have time for one more, if we can kind of move through it quickly, and then we can open it up for questions for those of you in the audience and those on YouTube. So here's one kind of quick one to conclude with. I think maybe it'll sum up our conversation well. So can you think of a concrete example, or are there concrete examples of social justice efforts in recent times that in your view were effective, at least in part, because of interfaith cooperation and solidarity?
I'll just quick answer this one. I think, we don't have to look too far on this one. August 5th, 2012, Sunday morning, 10, 11 o'clock, as Twitter is blowing up with a shooting at a Sikh temple. People made a decision and a conscious choice to show up in congregation outside of that temple. And it first started off with 50 to 100 to it turned into thousands of people who were gathered of different faiths, different races. Sometimes it's tragic that tragedy needs to bring us together, but maybe tragedy did bring us together, but it's not what's held us together. And what's held us together is love. And I think that is a concrete example, for us considering today. But I know there's so many of those examples when God shows himself.
And I'll I'll also try to be brief, just list a few things. I think that, you know, depending on how far we want to go, but 9/11 was a pivotal moment in our, you know, recent history. And I think the fact that there were many people out there that wanted to broad brush the entire Muslim faith and anyone even that looked like Muslims. There were many Sikhs that were targeted, but then there were so many people that came out in opposition to that hatred and that bigotry. Again, the Muslim ban, when Trump was in the presidency, and the first act that he did was banning Muslims from coming to this country, and then seeing in airports across this country thousands and thousands of people that just you know, organically just went and stood and protested. That was amazing, and that was so American. That was so American, and that's the love and the interfaith and the common humanity that we talk about. These are some of the things that we're of course as Muslims, and the Islamophobia that we continue to find people, you know, standing with us. But it's also on the reverse. It's also been an opportunity for us to stand. You know, like when the Sikh temple shooting happened, so many Muslims also came out. It was a horrific crime that happened in our community. And it was not something that just affected the Sikh community. It affected us. It affected all of us, because this was all of us, you know, the things that were happening with migrants at the border. We went out with the Latino community, with the whole Black Lives Matter. This was, you know, the structural racism in this country that has been swept under the rug for so long. It was an opportunity for all of us to go out. So it wasn't just people standing with the Muslim community. It was the opportunities of Muslims to stand with the broader community, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We're one humanity. Oh, okay.
Did you want to jump in there, Caitlin? Or?
Sure, yeah, I was just going to offer, you know, with the recent, you know, COVID pandemic, and from kind of, you know, my hands in the healthcare, you know, realm of stuff, have been keeping an eye on, you know, just the ways in which faith communities have been involved within the both at the time, the COVID testing, as well as the COVID vaccination outreach efforts. I'm a part of what's called the Interfaith Youth Corps. It's an organization founded by Ibu Patel in 2002, which focuses on making interfaith cooperation the norm in America. And they do so by partnering with universities and colleges. And so my time at Marquette, got involved with the Interfaith Youth Corps, and I'm a part of their alumni network today, which includes a healthcare cohort, but have been tracking that the Interfaith Youth Corps has facilitated and promoted a lot of work around the impact that religious identity, beliefs, and behaviors have on COVID-19 vaccination acceptance and hesitancy. And so as just a brief example, was a part of a focus group that brought together a group of medical professionals, community organizers, religious leaders, social workers, you know, and others, all with, you know, strong interfaith skills, to talk about the creation of a vaccine outreach program and what that might look like with the interfaith approach. And so just in having that interfaith approach, and people from, you know, all across the different religions, different ethnicities, different geographical locations represented in this focus group, we were able to offer a better understanding, you know, from a narrative point of view of the status of vaccine hesitancy and acceptance in our communities, and look for solutions for vaccine outreach, again, with an interfaith lens. And again, doing so through that interfaith lens, I think allows us to provide more tailored approaches for vaccine outreach to meet the needs of different communities, as well as provide a platform for, you know, a more global understanding of the role of faith communities in public health, and how different faith communities can work together to promote health justice for the common good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for all of their wisdom and insights. And now we are going to open it up to questions from the audience. We'll start with those that are here. So if you have a question, just kind of get the attention of Parisa there, and she will bring you a microphone.
Thank you to everyone who came. You all had a lot of great things to say. Interfaith dialogue is, as you all know, because you're here, a very important thing. A lot of talk has been done about dialogue between people of different faiths who come together, who welcome each other, who join together. And that's very important. I do believe it should be celebrated. As a member of the Unitarian Universalist Society, which invites all faiths to come together, to pray together and serve together and be active members of our society, I see a lot of value in celebrating that oneness between faiths. But there's, the other side of it. Pardeep, you had said that you had used the example of having an understanding of people who commit violence. It's very easy to have empathy for victims of violence. But what doesn't happen nearly often enough is to have empathy for the people who commit violence, because the people who commit violence are doing it because of a pain that they have inside. And as you said, they were children once too. They are acting because of a force that was on them, because of something that happened to them. If they didn't feel that they needed to get to that point where they did something so severe to hurt others, just to be heard, it wouldn't be happening. So this is a question, for every member of the panel, but particularly for you and for Janan, who talked about God consciousness. You talked about how it is, if we see something that's wrong, we need to put our hands on it and stop it. In Christianity, there's a similar concept. The English version of the Bible talks about knowing God. If you go to the Greek text of the Bible, it uses a word called gnosis, which is an intimate knowledge of God, which I believe is not just a passive knowing, but a hands-on, active, interactive action. And in this time where we are more and more divided, and there seems to be more and more of a need to reach out to the thems out there, not just the us's. Where do we start to dialogue with people who have such inclination to push us away?
That's a great question, and I think it speaks to Dr. Omar, just as we talk about weaponizing God, as we weaponize anything else, is that there are those that can pervert, those that can take something that is so powerful and so loving, and use it against us with. And so some of the work that we do is we work with extremists, and we work with those extremists that are on all different parts of the ideological frame and the faith frame. So we don't just get one type of extremist. We get people who take it too far. And oftentimes we find that they find parts and they cherry pick parts. They take things out of context. They find things that fuel their own hatred that's inside of them already. And there's other people who manipulate the word in the scriptures. And this is for any, and manipulation can look all kinds of different ways. I think a lot of times it can even look like not conscious manipulation. It can just be kind of a very subconscious thing of having a very immature faith. And I will say in kind of a way, like before the Sikh temple shooting happened, I had a very contentious relationship with God. I felt that at times God had abandoned me, only to come out and find out later that I was the one that had abandoned. I was the one that turned away. And somehow, some way, even in the midst of tragedy, that was always there. God was always there, and not you know your personal relationship with God. And what I find is that we do need to help those folks. We do need to have those conversations with them. Again, the vessel that person takes up, right? The devil shows up in that vessel. However we want to describe the devil, the evil shows up in that vessel of that person. So it's important to be able to decipher the difference between the vessel and not vilify the vessel, but vilify the ideology that is incorporated in that person, and to have them detached from it. The way that we look at it is sometimes within extremism work, we're trying to unravel the ideology, but not take apart the person. So it's a very careful dance, right? Because if this person has now staked their belonging and their personhood to this identity, and you start to unravel and say, you know what, that's not Islam, that's not Christianity, that's not, right? You can very easily do that, but then what does that person have to stand on now? And what we found is, if we can take it away, but when that person goes into now, when you do take it away, a suicidal depression, because you've taken it away too quick without feeding. So there's something missing within that person. And that's when I think that the word and the scriptures and all, and it can be manipulated by people who may or may not know that they're actually manipulating. We had a kid the other day who was very much, we worked with his parents for a very long time, but almost a year and a half. And then finally we had a conversation with the child. He was about 18 years old, going off to college. And once we actually had that conversation with him, you know, it was some of the questions that he kept asking was, well, who are the teachers that I should be listening to? Who are the religious scholars that I need to listen to? Because I've been told that that's not really the faith. I've been told by so many people that that's not the faith. And I think within all of our faiths, we have some of that element, right? Like, you know, this person, that person doesn't really represent the faith. And I asked him, I said, you know, he has a younger brother who's been struggling too, being picked on and all kinds of, and they got some other issues that are happening within sort of the dual identities that they take up in this small suburban town. Like, did you listen to your younger brother? Is he hurting? What's going on with him? Did you listen to the child? Did you listen to? So I think that you're very much right, that there needs to be ways to address some of that, of the people who can pervert. But I hope that the perversion doesn't become the representation of the faith. Is that's the scary part, is that you want to feed the good, you want to make sure that that's not the case. But yeah, no, I think that does happen. So you're right for bringing that up.
Thank you for that question as well. And I agree with what Pardeep said. You know, there has been numerous surveys, and there was a huge Pew Research study that took place that I often quote, that overwhelmingly, the people that have hatred and fear of Muslims overwhelmingly have never met a Muslim in their life. And that's just a fact. We fear what we don't know, you know? And the problem is, we live in a society where we have people at the pulpit, people in Congress, people in the White House that are benefiting from that fear. And so I feel sorry for the thousands and thousands of almost sheep that just are struggling and need somebody to fear. Maybe they have issues in their own life. the problem is that there are people that are benefiting from that. And so, when I talked about looking at our sphere of influence, there's always people within our sphere of influence that we can make a difference with. And if we can influence them, they will then influence other people. There's going to be a ripple effect. I also don't want to discount the idea that as much as Black, brown, people of color can talk about, the effects of racism, the issues regarding racism. At the end of the day, most of the racism is really, it's coming from white individuals, and the people that are going to be able to challenge them are going to be people that are also white individuals. Now, why am I saying that? The museum just had a whole exhibit on Nelson Mandela and apartheid. How did apartheid end after such a long history? Believe me, it wasn't because the Blacks were marching. It wasn't because they were dying, they were protesting. It's when white people around the world stood up and basically boycotted and divested. And then eventually white people in South Africa said, you know what? We cannot with good conscience continue this. And so it's a process. It's a process. History doesn't change overnight, but the sayings that if you're not going to be actively part of the solution, it means you're part of the problem. All we can do is really try to make a difference with our sphere of influence and continue whatever opportunity we have. When I kind of talked about that sense of God consciousness, about deliberate, every action should be deliberate. Any opportunity we have, if we're walking in a grocery store and we see something that's just not acceptable to us, somebody saying something to somebody, no, we shouldn't just walk away. We should get involved. We should say something. And I think that, we're in a COVID and we talk about herd immunity. I think when we've got that herd immunity and enough people are willing to put their foot down, that's going to be when we really see massive change.
Thank you again for your question. I see that there's a quick question virtually that I wanted to ask before we run out of time. Stephen is asking for anybody on the panel who's comfortable answering it. Christian theologians quote John 3:8, quote, "The wind, spirit blows, moves where it wills," as a reference to how the Holy Spirit can work outside of Christianity. Do other faiths have a similar reference?
So I guess that's us, me and you, Pardeep. Yeah, it's I'm not a theologian to quote, but definitely the idea that all human beings were created from God, and all human beings came from a single soul of a male and a female. And this idea of, besides taqwa, which is that sense of God consciousness, Muslims believe that every human being is born with what is called fitra. That's the knowledge of God. That's the innate ability to know God. And so regardless of who you are, if you have that innate ability to know God, obviously you're going to be moved and influenced by what is your nature? What is our nature? So yes, I think, and this really goes back to, at least I can only talk about the Muslim tradition, the idea that, we're talking about interfaith, but at the end of the day, from the Muslim perspective, we all came, God sent all of these messages and all of these prophets, not with different messages. It's not like one was told, give charity, and the other one was told, go steal from people. And one was said, save lives, and the other one said, go shoot people. No, all of them basically came with the same message from the same God, with the same basic idea. It just came at different times, different places in human development. But at the end of the day, if you were going to really just take the lessons of all of the faiths in the world, and even the non-faiths, even those that don't believe, what is it? It's about being good. It's about caring for the orphans. It's about caring for those that are homeless. It's about being concerned about about the earth and the environment and your fellow human beings. Are there messages that are different than that? I don't think so. I don't think so. So the idea that God works through everybody, of course, God works through everybody, at least from my perspective. God is the creator. You don't breathe. Your simple breathing comes as a result of God. So how can you not be motivated, to do good works through God?
Most Punjabi names are like Pardeep or Simranjeet, or there's Jeet or Preet or Deep in most Punjabi names. And most Punjabi names and Sikhi names were made to be universal. So my wife and I could have the same name. Lots of Punjabi couples have the same name. It was like kind of way ahead of its time, where deliberately Nanak was trying to create equality. He if you go into a Gurdwara, you will see people sitting at the same levels. That's because deliberately he was like, I don't care if you're rich or poor, what race you are and religion you are, I want you to sit at the same level. He was very revolutionary for his time at that time, because he was trying to fight against this sort of like mindset of I'm better than you or you're better than me. And really to say, if you don't see God in all, you don't see God at all. And let's just move forward with that. And then people challenged him and said, well, because he was like, I want you to feed everybody. I especially want you to feed the poor. And then the people would say, Guru, if I feed the poor, I'm going to be born in the next lifetime as an untouchable Dalit, right? I'm going to be born that way. And he said, if you don't look at that person like that's my mouth, look at that person like it's my mouth. Like look at it like you're feeding me, because and so he was trying to create all of these things to kind of be very, very deliberate and saying, no, we have to get to a place where we consciously see God in everyone. The words, so Atma and Paramatma, basically a God that's outside of you and also internal. And I think that's Stephen's question is so beautiful, because it brings up it made me think about sort of will. And I think that we were discussing will, internal will, before the program began. And sometimes people encompassing some of that will to do bad and some of that will to do good. And what, kind of like, so it does make me think about God's divine will and that, but in Sikhi, to summarize it in Sikhi, you would think about just your own personal responsibility here on earth, what you were given, the gifts you were given, whether that's so it comes back to, how do you do that? You do that through service. And within different faiths, it's called different things. Within Sikhi, it's called seva. And Nanak said, deeds before creeds. What did you do in life before your credentials, before anything else? What did you do, and how much did you sacrifice? How much did you, like a rich person didn't sacrifice much, but might have given more than the poor person. The poor person might have gave everything, but not given as much as the rich person. So to what degree did you sacrifice? How much did you inconvenience yourself? Is our calling. And the person that's considered the one that did inconvenience themselves, did sacrifice, did do the good, they served and saw God in everyone, that person is considered to be next to God then in the next lifetime, and sort of escapes this suffering cycle of life. And so within what Stephen said, you have to kind of just, and I think about it, is that God is still working. Right now, God is still working. He's working through all of us, but But God is truly working.
Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Keeping an eye on the clock, I think that's all the time that we have, but I know that there's some closing remarks. before
Yeah,
we
so
end.
now we're gonna hand it off to Rhonda, who's gonna tell us what should we go do now with all of this information and all of these things we learned. So now what do we do? What now?
Well, I mean, so much has already been said. It's nothing for me to really, I took a lot of notes. I'm sure you watched here and you took a lot of notes too, but
It's to support race and faith.
exactly.
Rhonda.
Yes, it's support race and
Next,
faith,
Joy.
truly. No, I will say, I feel like to have this conversation about interfaith, and which has already kind of come up as the white supremacy. We have to talk about and mention, I don't know how much time we got, 5 minutes? Okay, good. All right. I don't want to go on too long, but we have to talk about Christian nationalism and capitalism. I think those things, when you think about maybe enemies to interfaith, especially in this country, in the United States, I think that those are some of the two big pillars that bring about the confusion for people, which make it seem interfaith is impossible or has to be some like a oneness kind of dilution type thing, because the capitalistic mind has to win. It has to have more. It has to have something it can consume, produce more of, and popularize. And with interfaith, you can't do that, you know. So interfaith really hasn't become sexy in the mainstream because people haven't learned how to mass produce it in some type of capitalistic way. And I think for us as evangelists of interfaith, we have to fight against that capitalistic mindset that can't see how you can have multiple ways of being together without having to diminish yourself so something or one voice or one ideology can win, or whatever. It is the idea that we can all come together in the ways that we do to promote justice, peace, or whatever issue you may want to take on. I know in the past, interfaith of Greater Milwaukee here took on like housing in its early years. So it's a lot of things that we can accomplish together in this interfaith space, but we just have to recognize, I think, capitalism, and then the other part, Christian nationalism, which over the last 4 years, maybe a little bit more, has had permission to just run rampant and bring about, I think, more confusion and or promote the idea that interfaith is somehow anti-American. So I think that, again, for us as those who sit in this space, who value interfaith, we have to be able to speak against those things too, but also, as the question came about, how do you work with people who may be at a different end of you, or Pardeep said nicely, the evil, I would say maybe demonic might be at work. And it does take some discernment and allowing yourself, as you said, Pardeep, to be in that spiritual space and understand that we are spiritual people, and we have to work against these spiritual forces that want there to be darkness. And within the midst of a lot of that Christian nationalism that we see being done in our country today, it is still, that is a product of the white supremacist infrastructure that has been laid in this country. And so to have this conversation about interfaith, we have to acknowledge white supremacy, which has been put out there. We also have to see how capitalism and Christian nationalism are tools of white supremacy to keep interfaith work from really being able to happen, and people really to be able to understand it at the level at which we've been talking about today. And so what I would give to you as marching orders, if you will, is to harness that word courage that came up a few times tonight. One, I think it is the courage, as Pardeep was mentioning before, courage to allow yourself to be challenged by, one, knowing your own faith. You know, knowing what you truly say you believe and subscribe to, allowing yourself to really get into that, because I think you spoke to this, Janan, that sometimes people think that if you get into these interfaith spaces, it's going to maybe convert you or make you stop believing what your Nana raised you up on. But I found that for me as a Christian, I'm firm in my Christian convictions and beliefs about Jesus, interfaith has only helped me to grow, because I'm not afraid of what you believe or you believe. It helps me to see better and understand how to articulate better what I believe. Or even say, I need to go back and really think about that or pray about that or learn more about that. I don't have to stop being Christian because you made a good point. But so I think that first part is the courage to allow yourself to be challenged and to know your own text or scripture or whatever you believe. And I think the next part of that is the courage to go get your cousins, which is what Janan said. Which is what I always say when I'm doing my anti-racism work. Get your cousins. Don't worry about me and what other Black people are doing. We got this. But if you go and talk to Aunt Karen and Uncle Bob, you can make some changes that I would never be able to make. Again, that's a courage space. So again, courage to go check yourself, and then courage to go get your cousins. And then I would say, finally, the last bit of courage that I want you to use is to give yourself permission to get alongside some interfaith folks and see what you can do. I think we just have to give ourselves permission to ask questions and be in those spaces where other people may worship, pray, speak differently than we do, and say, this okay that I'm here and I don't really know what's going on, or I don't really know what I'm supposed to do at this moment, but it's okay. So I think the courage to put yourself in a space where you can be involved in an interfaith happening and not have to be in charge, not have to make it fit what you want it to fit, but kind of just be in a space and familiarize yourself with the people and what's going on, and find out where you can meet to really get some change happening, because it won't happen without all of us really allowing our voices. I think you spoke about that. If your hand's not working, use your voice. If your voice ain't doing it, challenge your heart. All of them. So I'm saying start with your heart, open up your mouth, and get to work on your feet. I had a teacher who helped me once. There's a profound thing she said to me, which is live the questions now. And that was so profound to me in that moment. I was in college. I was like 20 years old. And she said, I'm like, live the questions now. That was just so deep. But it still is. But part of that is like, so what? You may have a lot of questions and wonderings. They'll never get answered if you just sit there and hold them. It's the courage to give yourself permission to get engaged and wander and not be at the head of the class, but somewhere in the back, just a student. So get to know what you need to know more about where you reside with your own faith and your own thoughts, and get your family members and those folks that you can in your close sphere circle and challenge them on their own Christian nationalism and capitalistic views. And maybe you're a capitalist. I'm not saying all capitalism is bad, but I am saying it's ways that we try to use that to oppress other people that we need to check. And then finally, is give yourself the permission to not to be the one who needs to know or have all the answers in the space, in the room. Say, go to some space that you've not been into before, but you can learn, you can grow, and stir up some things for good. So thank you. Is that my 5 minutes? Okay.
Thanks so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for a wonderful conversation.